Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to take a quick look at the board game Dracula. Dracula is for 2 players, ages 12 and up, and the average play time is about 30 minutes. In this game, one player will be taking on the role of Dracula, while the other one takes on the role of Van Helsing. Essentially, both players are going to be racing to see who can capture their opponent's target cards first. Let's just take a quick moment to look at the components and how the game is played. Okay, now as far as the components go, you've got a map of London here, and there's 12 spaces on the board in 3 different rows. You've got some larger cards over on the left-hand side, unique to both Dracula and Van Helsing. These are called action cards, and I'll explain what they do in a little bit. You've got some smaller cards here, which are called event cards. Again, they are unique to both Van Helsing and to Dracula. You've got one Dracula pawn and one Van Helsing pawn, and you've got energy cubes of both colors. Basically, this is their life force, so to speak. If they happen to run out during the game, that player automatically loses. And finally, you've got 4 barriers here, one of each color, and basically they serve to block the movement of both players throughout the game. Now, as mentioned in my introduction, each player will be trying to capture 5 of their opponent's target cards. And what that simply means is, in the event deck, there are 5 cards that the other player is going to be trying to capture. In this case, Van Helsing has these victim cards in his deck, and Dracula is going to be trying to capture these cards. Whereas Dracula has these coffin cards in his deck, let's see if I can find one, there's one, that Van Helsing will be trying to find and capture. The first player to capture all 5 cards essentially wins the game. There's another victory condition, but I'll get into that later. Now, at the beginning of the game, Dracula will start on the ship, and Van Helsing will start in the manor. Both Dracula and Van Helsing will pick 6 cards out of their event deck and basically put them face down together and mix them up. So let's say that Van Helsing picks this one. Let's do these face down. Make it official. 4, 5, and 6. And let's say Dracula goes ahead and picks 6 cards. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright, now those cards are then shuffled face down, mixed up, and they are put onto each of the 12 spaces on the playing field. So no one has any idea where the cards that they had chosen, where they might be. The other event cards are simply placed off to the side for the time being, but they will serve a purpose throughout the game. Also, these action cards, each player will draw 5 from this deck, and that'll serve as their current hand. So in this case, Van Helsing will draw 5 cards, and Dracula will draw 5 cards. Alright. Now, at the very beginning of the game, Dracula gets to go first, and there are basically 2 parts to a player's turn: movement and then playing an action card. Movement, unlike other board games that I've seen, you can move as many spaces as you want to, but you'll actually have to make up for that later by playing an action card, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. But let's say that Dracula goes ahead and moves 1 space to the next area. Now, at that point, he can choose to look at this card to see what kind of encounter it might be. Now, in this case, it is one of Van Helsing's cards. Whenever a player discovers the card from the other player, movement stops at that point, and he must resolve this action. In this case, he'll have to combat this a hunter, which has a attack value of 3. So now that movement is over, Dracula then goes to play an action card. And action cards come in a number of different shapes and sizes. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. On the very top left of the card is the number of movement points that can be played to make up for the number of spaces he moved during the movement phase. If the player does not play a number high enough to match the number of spaces they moved, then they'll have to lose some of their energy cubes. Again, if you run out of energy cubes, you lose the game. So you'll need to make sure that you play a card that has enough movement points on it to match what you just did during the movement phase. Now, in this case, there's a hunter. So Dracula would need to find a card in here that would match or exceed this particular card. Now, in this particular case, if Dracula were to play a card that equals this particular attack value of 3, then nothing happens. The battle would result in a draw, and this would be flipped back over. If Dracula managed to play a card that had an attack value higher than that 3, then this card would go into the opponent's discard pile, in this case Van Helsing's discard pile, and then Dracula would be able to go through his deck and seed one of these in its place. Now, also on these cards, you've got some different colored bars here, and basically that represents these barriers that I haven't mentioned yet over on the upper left-hand corner of the shot here. Basically, whenever a card is played or is chosen for this particular turn, that player can then pick the barrier of that color and place it anywhere on the board. Basically, this will restrict movement. So if I were to put a yellow one here, Dracula or Van Helsing would not be able to cross that barrier. Now, at any point, you cannot box a player in or prevent them from moving to a certain part of the board. So placing the barriers in this way would be illegal. Now, finally, on a card, besides the movement, attack value, and the barrier, there is a special action listed on the very bottom. For example, this one, in addition to moving a yellow barrier, move a barrier of any other color. So if Dracula were to play this card, he would not only be able to place a yellow one or move the yellow one, but he could pick a different barrier and place that too. So let's go ahead and assume that Dracula is going to play this one because he has no other cards in his hand that would be able to beat that Hunter of 3. So he would play this one. This accounts for the movement. He only moved one spot, so this movement of 4 covers him. This attack value of 3 matches that, so that would end in a draw. And he placed these 2 barriers down, so he's good there. So, in effect, that would end his turn. This would be flipped back over because it ended in a draw, and then Van Helsing would take his turn. Okay, now just to give you another example of how this might play out, let's just quickly go through Van Helsing's move. Van Helsing, this is his movement phase, so let's say he decides to investigate the card that he's on. Now, this happens to be a card that he put down himself. It belongs to him. Now, in this case, he can just put the card back, and he doesn't show it to Dracula, of course, but he can just keep moving. So let's say he decides to move again and looks at this card. Now again, this is a card that he put down. This is a hunter, so he'll just put that back and he'll opt to keep moving. Alright, and let's say he investigates this one. Now that one happens to be a coffin, and because that is one of his target cards, he would go ahead, capture this, put it aside, and look through his event deck to see what he wants to put there in his place. Let's say he decides to put one of his own victims, one of Dracula's victim or target cards there. Now that would effectively end his movement turn. Now he would have to go through the 5 cards that were in his hand and play an action card that would meet his movement cost. Since he didn't do any battle, he doesn't have to worry about the combat at all. But in this particular card, for example, he moved 2 spaces, so this card might actually be good for him. Movement of 2, that would cover him. Dracula may not use the special action of his next action card. So if he were to play this card, Dracula would not be able to play the special action on his action card on his next turn. So let's say Van Helsing goes ahead and plays this one. He would simply put that into his discard pile for the time being, and that would effectively end his turn. Alright, and that's basically it. I know I didn't cover everything that the game has to offer, but this should give you a brief overview. Now, you're probably wondering, if the goal is to capture 5 of your opponent's target's cards, then why not just hoard all of the target cards into the event pile that you have off to the side? Well, at some points in the game, these 2 pawns may land on each other. When a pawn lands on top of another pawn, they can opt to look, to show each other their cards. In this case, let's say that Van Helsing had captured 4 of the coffin cards and was currently looking for the final coffin on the board. Now, since they landed on each other, Van Helsing opts to show Dracula his event deck, and Dracula in turn would have to show him his event deck. If it's determined that the other coffin card is accounted for in the event deck that's off to the side, then Van Helsing would automatically win. So you have to sort of put some on the board and some into your event deck. It's a nice little balance game that you have to play between the two. And there you have it. That's just a very brief look at the game Dracula. As I mentioned, this doesn't cover everything that the game has to offer, but this should give you a general idea. I think the game's a lot of fun. There's a lot going on here. You have to manage action cards. You have to worry about these barriers. They're always changing locations on the board. You have to worry about your life points. And it's also a game of memorization. These event cards, there's only 12 spaces, but these event cards are constantly being switched out throughout the entire game. So you're always discovering something new from start to finish. It's pretty intense, and like I said, you're going to have to sort of try and keep track of where your cards are in relation to your opponents. You can check out the rest of my thoughts via my review at www.dadsgamingaddiction.com, or you can simply click on the link in the below description that'll take you there as well. This is Vince, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.